Evening everybody, here we are again. We've got a really exciting show. It's all about midlife relationships. Do we love them? Do we leave them? Or do we reinvent them? So, and within that, are you ever too late to get married? So it's a really sort of transition time, which we talk a lot about, don't we? When you hit your 40s and your 50s, midlife crisis, if you don't like that word, midlife choices. And within that, and especially women, as you know, their careers are going in different directions, they might be going back to work, kids are leaving home, you start to reevaluate. And of course, the biggest part of our life generally is our relationships. Mm-hmm. So, you know, taking stock, looking at that relationship. We've talked about this before. You know, when you're in your 40s and 50s, we're only living an extra 20 years. Now we might be living 30 or 40 years. It's a long time to be married to the same person. So where are we with relationships? Do they need to be rekindled? Do they need to be realigned? Certainly reevaluated. And maybe it's about walking away from those relationships. So big, heavy debate today.
Okay. Oh, where are we going to start? So we've got dating, relationships, and marriage. Should we start at the beginning? Should we start with dating? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. Do we start? Yeah. Do we start with marriage and where you are in your marriage? Maybe that's the starting point. There's a song in there, isn't there? Do you stay or do you go? Go now. And the statistics are all out there, aren't they? Yes. The rates of divorce for over 50 has doubled in the last 10 years. And then the other side of that, if you are divorced, 50 plus staying unmarried has tripled. Yeah. So that's quite interesting as well. So maybe the starting point is marriage. Do you stay or do you go? And at what point, because I read some research, who calls it? And the research that I read actually said in the last 10 years, it's now women who are standing up and saying, this isn't working for both of us, and actually putting their hand up and making the decision, not just for her, but for both of them. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I suppose the reason why that's increased so much, I mean, I'm going to talk traditionally, in the past, that just simply wasn't an option, because I am going to talk stereotypically, but most women maybe didn't have the full-time career that would have enabled them to be alone. They couldn't afford to rent the house or have another mortgage or whatever. So they probably, I'm talking the olden days, you know, they didn't even have their own bank account or anything. So that just simply wasn't an option in the past, where of course nowadays it is an option. We do have more choices. We do potentially have more financial freedom. And we also have, and I don't want to use that word, but we have more confidence to do it.
Yeah, and also I think with that, in my mother's generation, like emotionally and sort of psychologically and even romantically, it wasn't an option. You know, once, you know that phrase, once you're married for life.
You've made your bed, you lie in it.
Yeah, so you wouldn't, your needs within that weren't really important. It was more about your role. And your role was to, you know, be the homemaker, to be the carer, the nurturer, the family, the children, your partner. So I guess that outdated mode of thinking has really changed probably in the last 20, maybe 30 years.
Definitely.
So women do have more financial independence, more choices, but I also feel, I mean, I remember like my mum, you know, if there was someone in her social circle who was divorced, it was so frowned upon and it was a failure and how could they do it? It was all negative, whereas now it is more acceptable.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say. You couldn't be the divorced women. Can you imagine having the divorced women on your street? People would be talking about you, and it might not even have been the lady's choice, but she'd have probably been the one. Oh, she's that whole she's that divorced woman, and lock up your husbands because she's going to be after your husband or whatever. There's a lot of negative stereotypes, really, weren't there? Whereas now, not so much. And in fact, when I divorced, and I wasn't in my 40s, but I was late 30s, lots of people said to me, "You're brave," you know, which probably wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. It would have been, "You're stupid, what are you going to do now?" You can imagine going back to your parents' house. Whereas now it was seen as, well, that's a brave thing to do. I didn't feel brave at all, but do you know what I mean?
I think it's just, it's like the balance. There's a new balance of power, whereas I guess if there was divorce 20, 30 years ago, it was generally the men driving it, and women were, and I don't want to say victim, but they weren't part of that.
It was done to them.
Yes, exactly. They weren't part of the decision-making process, and they certainly weren't the ones saying, "Look, we've got a problem," and even calling it. Whereas now, it's interesting that that balance has shifted. But I was really thinking about it in terms of, if you take, let's say, your 40s into your early 50s, most men at that stage in their life, their career is at their peak, right? So, you know, they've got an amazing job, they've got their career, they've got their hobbies, they've got their interests. Their life isn't the home, is it? Part of it,
Yeah, it's
it
part
adds
of it.
value, and it's part of their life, but it's not their whole life. So they've got, and I don't want to say distraction, but they've got other aspects in their
And-
life that feed them, that motivate them, that excite them. And for most women, especially in our generation, have given up work for a period of time, or a big chunk of time, to raise a family. I think when we talk about our children's generation, I think it's going to be different again.
Yeah.
So suddenly you're in your 40s, mid 40s, 50s, and I think I was saying this to you, a friend of mine, I was saying this to you when we were on the phone. You know, a friend of mine was a lawyer. I had another friend who worked for United Nations. I've got another friend who went to Oxford. Really bright women, gave up their careers because they wanted to build a home and be at home, and they've been happy within doing that, and happy with that choice. There's no anger, there's no bitterness. But what happened is, when they hit around sort of 45, 46, and the kids have grown up, they've left for uni, they've got their own lives, they're living in London, that empty nest, which I think is massive, plus physically age, and we've talked about that hundreds of times, hormones, and you might be hitting menopause. There's a real, like, empty nest, there's an empty feeling, and empty in their lives. And that's why I feel that sort of re-evaluation now is coming from women, because they're looking at their life, they're looking at the next 40 years ahead, they're looking at their ambitions or their dreams or their desires, and they're feeling empty. And I think within that re-evaluation is my marriage and my relationship.
Yeah, because I think even, you know, last week we were talking about midlife being a time of reinvention or rediscovery, or however we ended up by the end of this time. If you've got the right positive mindset, this can be a really exciting time. Well, that's great when you're looking at, oh, I'm going to start this career, I'm going to learn how to play the piano, or I'm going to trek Mount Kilimanjaro, whatever. What if that period of reinvention or rediscovery actually does include your marriage? And when you start to look at things, you do start to look and go, oh, where's the romance gone, or where's the intimacy gone, or where's the excitement gone, or whatever,
All the togetherness,
or
all
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Potentially this period of reinvention, re-evaluating could have quite a, you know, I'm not going to say a negative because it could end up being positive, but, you know, quite a dramatic impact on your relationship. And I think last week I got so carried away with this, oh, it's all so positive, it's a wonderful time of life and we can do this, but actually potentially it could have this major, major effect.
Yeah, and it could have almost a devastating effect.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Like, so, I came out of a 22-year marriage, and it was devastating. It was so painful. It impacted myself, my ex-husband Tom, the children, our extended friendship circles. It was hard. And even if you make that decision, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and it doesn't mean you're going to walk through that door and everything's going to be fine. You've got to really work at that as well. So, and then you go through, I don't think very few people wake up one morning and go, that's it, this marriage isn't working. It builds up over a period of time, and that sort of, do you leave it, do you reinvent it, do you rekindle it? There is a responsibility to really take stock and try
so
your
hard.
hardest.
Yeah, I think
to
we can
make
both say
it.
that, because unfortunately we both have a marriage behind us. And the first thing I say to any of my friends who are starting to think, I don't know if my marriage is going to last, and I just say, it is bloody hard. And like you, the main decision did come from me. So funnily enough, we are these stereotypical women that are making the decision. I say, look, it was my decision, and yet it was so hard.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
please, you have got to do everything you possibly can first to try and find that spark, find the love, find whatever is missing.
Or just it's like any relationship, just realign it to where
Who
you
you
both
are
are and who you are at this point in time, and also what your needs are, or your desires, or your ambitions, or your dreams. And a friend of mine, probably 6, 7 years before, was going through that, and she was like, my marriage isn't working, and we're just not getting on, and we're not connected, and she's one of my closest, dearest friends. And I sort of said, rather than starting with, your starting point is my marriage is broken, right? It's just not working. I'm angry all the time, or he doesn't do this, or all this sort of stuff. Instead of that's your starting point, just park that and move it to the side. And then look at all other aspects of your life and where you are. And she was one of my friends who was hugely, hugely successful in business. And she gave that all up to be at home. And she loved it. But it was classic empty nest. And I said, well, find a career, an alternative career. And she went, funnily enough, she went into law because that was what the family needed, an expectation. She never really wanted to be a lawyer. And I said, well, where's your passion? And she actually got a coach to help her.
Right.
So she ended up retraining and now has a career. She ended up pursuing like interests that she's like yoga, which she loves. And I said, if you do all those things, it might not be the marriage at all.
Absolutely.
It might be just where you are in your life, being demotivated or unhappy or not fulfilled. And I think it's really hard if your partner in relation to you, his career's done this, because there is a disconnect completely. So try all of that, work it all out, see where you are. And if at the end of that process, both of you are like, we can't get this to work, and you do all the things about rekindling. So whether it's date night, find a hobby that you can do together. If you do all of that and still, then you know the decision is right. You've almost tested it out, because it would be awful, wouldn't it, if that you wake up and it had nothing to do with your husband. It's just where you were rather than your husband. And I think that works both ways for men and women.
Absolutely.
But I do wonder whether women do analyse, we do contextualise, we do think it through. I think most women do, whereas most men, I don't know, just go along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think they also have a great brain that I often envy, that just allows them to focus on what they're focusing on. I'm in work. I'm focusing on work, and I'm playing golf.
Generally,
I'm going to focus on playing golf. Whereas my brain goes, Oh, what's my daughter doing? Oh, where's she doing that? Oh, I'm at work. Oh, I've got to do this. Oh, I've got to make that phone call. Oh, I've got to buy tea. Oh, I've got to do whatever it is. I would love to have that. I know I'm simplifying it quite a lot here. That male brain that just, or maybe I'm just.
It is, but it is that, like you say, that razor focus. And if you go back to stereotypes and conditioning and roles, the stereotypical roles, the man's role is to provide. That means go to work, provide for his family, bring in the money. And if he does that well, he's successful. The woman's role is to nurture, the homemaker, to make sure the children are all right. And if you go back to conditioning, it's our role to make sure our men are happy. I mean, my mother used to say, she had this view that, you know, your role, your purpose is to make sure your husband is happy, to not serve him, that sounds a bit dramatic, to make sure he's happy. And then among her friends, you know, if there was any infidelity, it wasn't, you know what, he is really out of order for doing that. It's like, if your husband has an affair, it's your fault. I mean, honestly, I mean, thank God it's not like that now, but all that sort of conditioning. So I guess men are razor focused because their role is to provide. And as long as they're doing that, they get a big tick. And I do think, you know, if you've got a career and you've achieved a high level of success, it is exciting, it is motivating, it is fulfilling. And of course, for a woman, when, especially around that empty nesting and then, you know, like physical changes and you've got menopause, it's empty. The empty nest comes with a feeling of emptiness. And we talked about this last week as well, that so many of us, we're givers. We give out all the time. And in that process, sometimes you forget yourself. So you wake up in your mid-40s or 50s and you go, well, you take stock of your life. Where am I in my life? Where am I going in my life? And a big part of that will be your relationship. So I think it's a positive, but that process of separation or divorce is devastating, and it's painful, and it takes a lot of hard work as well to have a good relationship post it. But even today, I had a couple of friends, one friend particularly said, because I've got 3 daughters, said, oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Just think about your lovely family unit. Think about your 3 girls.
Oh, right.
Think about, they don't want divorced parents. And it felt quite old fashioned. And I thought, that's how I was brought up. I mean, that is exactly how I was brought up. So the feeling of guilt and breaking a home up when I'm a home, creator, all that sort of stuff. So even here we are, the last couple of years, you still get that conditioning.
I carry that guilt. I do carry that guilt that I broke up a family with, and it was a nice family, and there was a child involved. I carry that guilt, and I didn't grow up in, the Catholic background or anything like that, but I carry that guilt. So even in 2021, there is still that element that how could I do
get
that? That was very selfish as a mother to break up.
Yeah, and I think I felt the same. I really did feel the same, because it's not, as a mother, how could you do that? How could you do that?
I think my mum said that to me. How could you do that to your child?
Yeah, but do you know what it was for me, that turning? Because guilt's interesting, isn't it? Because I kind of sort of, guilt, there's consequences and taking responsibility, and there's guilt. And guilt is self-imposed, and it's a negative, right? So what, for me, the switch was, and especially having 3 girls, what was I teaching them? What was I showcasing? What was I teaching them as a role model to them? What was I telling them about love, romance, marriage, relationships, family, that once you're married for life. Even if both parties aren't truly happy or fulfilled, or and I just thought, I'm not sure that's the message I want them.
Exactly. I mean, my parents stayed together for the children, and I appreciated having my mum and dad together. But at the same time, when they argued, every single time I thought, are they going to break up? Are they going to separate? There was this constant fear. And I actually thought, as they stayed together for the children, but I didn't want to do the same thing. It actually inspired me to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Because whilst they are happy now, they're in their late 70s and they are still together and they've rubbed along for all those years. I know there was a big period in those middle years where they weren't. I don't think either of them were particularly happy.
Yeah.
And is it?
And what impact does that have?
This is what I'm now like conflicted. Is it good that they rode that through and are now at the stage where they just rub along, but they stayed together? Or is it good that I was inspired that actually you should go after the life that you really want?
I think it also depends, the rubbing along and how they behaved, because a family environment where you've got both parents angry and bitter and full of disdain, and it's not nice to be around. And also that's another, if we talk about sort of role models or showcases, you know, young impressionable children don't want that definition of marriage. And what's interesting, because with my mum and dad, they were married 55 years and they were so in love. That's all I remember. They had their ups and downs. Obviously, they went through a lot of turmoil and things in their life, but they were so connected. They were intimate. They were together. They loved each other. That love never waned. Even right up to, you know, when we lost my mum, my dad was still so in love with her, always.
Yeah.
So that is the image of love and marriage, which is positive. It's two people building a life together who's there for each other. They feed off each other. It's a positive. My sister the same with her partner. They've been together 22, 23 years. So I've seen really positive marriages. And it's not that I'm unrealistic, because I don't think every marriage, you know, life does take over and you do have difficult times, and there are times where you're frustrated or you don't feel supported or you're bored or whatever it is. But even within that, there is still an intimacy and connection where they're still in love.
Absolutely.
And I thought
that was my grandparents. They were married for 70 years. So that's like my role model. It can happen. That didn't mean they didn't argue. That didn't mean they didn't get on each other's nerves. But as you say, right up until literally the pair of them died within 24 hours, 70 years together in love. It's possible.
And I think also I've had that side of it, you've seen a different side of it, but when you're in your mid-40s or early 50s, and, you know, as I was saying, that, you know, divorce rates over 50 have doubled in the last sort of 10 years. So I think that's where the balance of power is. Women are saying, I'm not really happy. And like you said, now I can do something about it. They've got the confidence, they might have the financial independence, they might feel that they're worth it, that actually I matter. And my role isn't just about giving to my marriage and my family and my children and my friends. Actually, within that, I matter. And I think also because we've got more ahead of us. Yeah. You know, it's not like you're dying at 62. It's like another 30
or whatever,
or 30 years or so. So, so that's sort of where we are in reevaluating and making choices. So I guess the next stage is, what do you do when you realise that marriage isn't working? You've tried everything you can to rekindle, to rework, and it's still not working. making the decision, initiating a separation, divorce. And I was reading an article which I just, which is around this idea. So you come out of that marriage, but before that, there's a halfway house, which is called LAT, living apart together. Is on the rise. There's lots of people have been married for 20, 25 years. They still want that partnership, and there's still an intimacy, but their needs are slightly different. So this whole concept of living apart together, I thought was really interesting. And quite new, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. I would hate it, personally, because I'm that person that likes that togetherness, security or whatever. But I could see this could boom. This could absolutely boom, because there's lots of people that are very much in love. But when you live together, and especially after lockdown, we can imagine that this has been even more of an issue. When you are living together 24/7 or whatever, there's loads that you grate on each other, you get on each other's nerves. But what about, because I read the same article, what about if you are still married, you want to be together for the remainder of your years, but you actually choose to live apart? Now, some of the couples had got very routine arrangements. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So it was literally like they spend 3 nights at her house and 2 nights at that house, and they have 1 night where they're completely apart, or one only goes to her house because it's tidier and she can't stand going to his house because it's too messy. And I just thought, I can see this working, because in a way, potentially, let's be realistic, if you've been together over 20 years, you can still very much be in love with them, but my God, they're going to have got on your nerves at several times. I mean, I was telling you, the cereal packets that's left out every single morning, the empty milk bottle, and it's like I have to go around or just leave it and wait, hope he does it when he gets home or whatever. There's certain things that you'd be like, I really love you, my husband, but boy, if I didn't have to deal with that, I'd love you even more.
Yeah.
Do you not think? I can see, and people having like date nights, you could see that. And I don't mean date nights when you're living together, but going round to someone's house and maybe taking a bottle of wine and maybe thinking, well, I might make a bit more of an effort. It could actually rekindle.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really interesting concept. I do wonder about, the family unit, the children, the extended family and friends, because I guess it takes some explanation, doesn't it? Yeah. Maybe you've got to convince it's a new way, not just for the couple, but the broader network around them. But there's different ways, and I think that's not balance of power, but I think today we as a society, we're much more open-minded, we're much more independent, and there is, for men and women, but a greater sense of your own personal well-being or happiness or desires, etc. So what comes out of it is different ways of doing things. So, the living apart together is for that couple who actually don't want to get divorced. They want to keep the family unit, but they want some space. There's different ways. There's different ways to carve it. Just in the same way, I think there's different ways to separate and be divorced. So one thing with Tom and I, we saw a lot of people see counsellors and psychotherapists to sort of help them work through the relationship. We actually used someone to help us through the separation. Right. It was the best thing we ever did, because to get to that point, there is pain. There is pain, there is sadness, there's grief, there's grieving, and usually there is some form of anger, right? Unresolved anger. And if you're going to come back, because they're still important and they're still part of your life, even mainly because you've got children. So she helped us deal with all that sadness and that loss. And there was so much grief. There was so much pain. It was so sad, because you built this amazing life for 25 years, all of our hopes and dreams. And she helped us deconstruct all of that. And actually, I'll never forget it. What I realised is there were times, and I had anger. So did he. I felt let down. So did he. I didn't feel supported, nor did he. So the pain and the negative feelings we both felt. And rather than us separating and keeping that, which I think turns into bitterness, we worked through all of that. There was a lot of forgiveness. And actually, once all of that sort of dissipated, if that's the right word, really brought us together.
Yeah.
So we became really close, and everything that we love, care and respect in each other, we sort of reconnected.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And so when it came to, well, how are we going to physically be a family unit, separate houses, the classic thing that you do is, you know, dad gets a family house and mum gets a family house and the kids go in between. And we made this sort of decision that we're a family unit. We are a family unit and we have a family house. So the girls have their own bedrooms, we have the family house. And I thought, when we talked about this, I thought we were being really innovative, and actually then I read an article and it said it's called birds nesting. So you have the family house, and then that's where the kids are anchored, and you do family things. We spend Christmas Day, Easter, birthdays, all this sort of stuff together. And then when parent one's on duty, so when Tom's got the girls, he's in the family house.
Right.
When I've got the girls, I'm in the family house.
Oh, okay.
So it all evolves, and at one level that's quite modern as well, isn't it? It's a different way of doing it, but it means for the girls, and I think that was important for me and Tom, is that even though we had separated, we still have a very, very close relationship. Romantically, we're not together, but we are a family unit.
Yeah.
Through all that change, and we, there's so many different ways to do it now.
I think we're going to go over to the chat in just 1 minute.
I'm dying to know what everybody's asking.
Just before we do, I think we almost every week we end up saying, "You do you," and it's like whether that's how you dress, whether it's, I don't know, how you're aging, whether it's because you get a tattoo or 800 piercings, we always end up going back to the point where you are you and only you know what's best for you. And I think we've already, in 30 minutes, got to that point where if you do choose to separate, or if you choose to stay together, and how you make that work, whether it's living, what was it called? Living apart together.
Living apart, yeah.
Whether it's choosing to separate, whether you have a bird's nest house, whether you do the two houses, whether, you know, whatever it is, whether you have date nights, blah, 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 you've got to sort of forget that anybody else's judgment. Because if that's what works for you, some people go, well, that's a bit weird. You know, Tom's there on Christmas Day. I mean, they're divorced. I mean, what's he doing there on Christmas Day? Blah, blah, blah.
We have a great time.
Exactly. It's wonderful. And no one has a right to judge you on how, well, as I say, it's the same every single week. No one has a right to judge you on how you're choosing to live your life.
I think with that, and I have seen it with, you know, a few friends who have separate, you know, very good friends. So I see it from the husband's perspective, I see it from the wife's perspective. And they separate, and what makes me really sad, and Tom and I were like, this is not going to happen to us. And I could see, because you're carrying anger and letdown and frustration and pain, and I can see how that turns into a bitterness and how you carry it, right? None of us, both of us did not want that. We felt we deserved to realign and rekindle the base of our relationship, which is love and respect and care for that person. And I've always said this, you know, next to my dad, the most important man in my life was Tom. And you know what? He's going to be the most important man in my life going forward, because he is the father of my children, and we are a family. But the thing for me was, I've got too many friends who are so angry and so bitter, and that relationship is so acrimonious. A year down the line, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, so acrimonious. And I tell you who suffers the most is the children. Well, no, they're not coming to, I don't want him coming to the wedding, and I just thought, we both felt we have a responsibility to our children, and they are the priority. My Mother's Day, probably, she would have said, well, if your children were the priority, you would have never separated in the first place. You would never have got divorced. How could you do that to your children? I felt very strongly, and I think that was even more importantly than my own needs and all the rest of it. But for me, and especially having 3 girls, if I had 3 boys, maybe it would have been different. But I was like, what am I showing them? What am I teaching them about their life and relationships and marriage? So I think that's the part that was important, is do put the children first. And I've seen horror stories where it's so acrimonious and the kids get involved and not nice.
Yes.
Anyway, how are we doing on the chat?
So we've had some interesting comments from the ladies. Mel says that marriage guidance actually saved her relationship because they both listened more to each other. So that's kind of an example of someone saving their marriage. We've had Nikki who said she really thoroughly enjoyed her divorce because she gave herself a divorce makeover.
Did she?
Yeah, and it gave her a new lease of life. Then a lady called Isabel said that she's pleased about this new balance of power because she wasn't in a very nice marriage, he had all the control, and she's glad that women have a lot more choices because, you know, she's able to get divorced and leave him and make her own choices now. She feels like she's walking into the unknown, but she just thinks it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think if a relationship is destructive or abusive or controlling, the woman needs to find that strength, doesn't she, and deserves to move on. The divorce makeover is quite interesting, and I guess the sort of divorce makeover is there's 2 sides to it. One side is the conversation we had last week, which, you know, we said about reinvention, and we said we didn't like that, but that rediscovery, it's like you're reclaiming who you are, you're rediscovering who you are
you might
now.
have got a bit lost.
Yeah, and who you are now, and also who you are post the relationship, because women, especially, gross generalisation, we're defined, aren't we, by our careers or our role as a mother or being a wife. So suddenly you're defining yourself, aren't you? You're rediscovering yourself. So it's like, who am I today and where am I going? And then I guess the other part, which goes back to where you said, where do we start? Should we start with dating? Is that sort of makeover.
Yeah.
Because suddenly
you're thinking,
you're out.
Oh, people are going to start looking at me again, or I want them to be looking at me.
Or I might, not today, but I might want to find another partner or a relationship. Doesn't mean just because you're divorced and you're 50, there's no room for romance or intimacy. One of my closest, dearest friends, you know, found love at 64, and you know, and he's 74. And I go around to their house, they're like teenagers. I'm like, can you guys get a room, please?
Get a room.
Oh, get a room,
that's
really.
gross.
But it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, old love is like young love. It isn't. The emotions are the same.
Absolutely.
Absolutely the same. And actually, Tom's aunt remarried after losing her husband. She remarried when she was 74. It's fantastic. Met this amazing man. Blah 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 blah. So that sort of divorce makeover is also on the out. You know, suddenly you're single and you might want to go on a dating app, or you're going out, and so finding your sense of style or
absolutely. My closest friend, unfortunately, is going through this right now, and she's going through that makeover right now. So she's whitening the teeth, she's had Botox, she's having to find a new hairdresser because her husband was a hairdresser. So for the first time in like a very long time, she's looking for a hairdresser to do her hair. You know, she's dieting, she wants to lose some weight. And you're absolutely right that it is twofold. It is more, I'm coming out of this marriage, I think they've been together about 17 years. I'm coming out of this marriage, I want to feel good about myself. But also she knows at some point she would like to meet somebody. She would like to meet someone, you know, so Yeah, dating. Can we talk dating? I'm quite excited by dating. You know, I think we've totally dissed marriage in midlife here. Can I just say I'm really happily married? Because I feel like we've talked about all this and we've sort of gone, oh, it's a time, oh, we might look and oh, we have to live apart. Actually, there are some marriages and at midlife, it's wonderful. So I am,
and
going to
as
throw that
my
into the pot.
parents, 55 years, and they were very, very much in love.
Yeah.
And how wonderful to have a marriage like that. It's the same with my sister. You know, they've been together 22 years, and they're so together and connected. I think the difference now is for both parties, if you don't have that, you don't have to not compromise, but you don't have to accept that. Does that make sense? There is more, there can be more, and you know what? We have the independence on both sides to go for it.
Yeah. I was going to say something then, and I immediately stopped myself because I thought back to what you were saying earlier about you've got to find, this sounds really cliched, but you've got to find your happiness. You can't expect your partner,
100%.
your husband, whether they've been around 5 minutes or whether they've been around 50 years, you can't expect them to make you happy.
Totally agree with that.
I really loved what you said. I'd never actually thought about that first. Check the rest of your life, because it's so easy to blame the thing that's right in front of us.
Absolutely.
You don't love me as much anymore. You never bring me flowers. You don't kiss me when you come in the house. You leave cereal boxes. You know, whatever it is, it's very easy to look. We've said this before. Our brains always default to the negative. And actually, having a look at the rest of your life and then looking at your relationship. And also, and my husband has said this to me, so obviously I'm guilty of it sometimes. He says, sometimes I think you look for the negatives, like the cereal boxes or the lost keys. He said, because he's like this in all areas, he's like, always look for the positives first. And it is amazing, because immediately you go, oh yeah, but you do this, and you do this, and you do this. And then
But it's
immediately you
those-
feel more love, don't you?
But it is those little things that niggle you, aren't?
Yeah,
You
there's
know,
no
it's
getting
the
away from
little
that.
niggles, and also the sort of the reverse of it is, if you know that bothers me, then why don't you just put it
Yes.
away? So it's all, and usually it's those little things
It
that
is.
if they're unresolved, that build, and then you're at a stage where there's the Atlantic between you, and I was listening to a talk about like the communication breaks down, and the wife says, I'd really like to go to the cinema on Sunday night, and the husband goes, oh no, I've got to work, or oh, I don't want to go to the cinema. And because they don't work through it, she doesn't say, but I'd actually really like that because it means we can have some time together and I feel it'll be good to go. She doesn't explain herself. She expects her husband to be a mind reader. And then what happens, it creates resentment. And I think resentment can build, and it translates to her, well, he's not fussed. So what happens the next time she wants to go to the cinema? She goes, well, I'm not asking him. Phones up a friend and says, let's go to the cinema. So I think that it widens. It's like pebbles that build, and then suddenly, before you know it, there's a beach between you.
Yeah.
So
I think that is. Do you know, sometimes we really need these constant little reminders, because I think I've had like a few. Let's just say my hormones are well wonky at the moment. Hands
I
up,
hear
ladies.
you.
Yeah, I know. And I think at times I do expect my husband to just know.
yeah,
And to know why I've reacted like that, or to know why I've overreacted, or to know why I was crying.
and then to respond in
And
the
then
way
respond
that
accordingly,
in the way that
only
you
way.
need it.
Yes.
Yeah, that you need it, not how they're trained to
Exactly. He wants to
fix it.
fix
or-
it,
Yeah.
find the solution,
Yeah.
And most times we don't want the solution. We just want someone to listen to us, or put their
Yeah,
arm
put-
around us while we
exactly,
cry, or whatever. And then
exactly.
we know we're overreacting, but I'm expecting you now to know this, to know how to react and do everything perfectly.
Yeah,
He's not a mind
absolutely.
reader, and we have to remember
I
that.
remember reading the, I'd like to take credit for it, but I read a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
yeah.
I read it in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s. I mean, I love it. It's almost like a sort of a Bible to me. You know, it's brilliant. But in there, it talks about life, and it talks about a grid. And it says, in the grid, there's 9 boxes. And each box is part of your life. Really important, significant aspects of your life. So one could be relationship, marriage, children, career, hobby, self-care. And it said you need balance in all of those areas to be happy, authentic and fulfilled. If you don't have that balance and one of those boxes becomes the whole box, you will have conflict in your life. And what was interesting was men are very good at having those boxes. So there's evenness and there's more balance. Women, and I think it goes back to our role and our purpose and our conditioning and all the rest of it, that box becomes a single box and it is the home.
Yeah.
And that home is about your husband, it's about your children, it's about procreating, it's about... So when that goes, and it does happen, or in the same way if that box is your relationship and there's nothing else and that relationship fails or perhaps the partner's died, the emptiness is, the void is so great. And I've never, ever forgotten it. I've never forgotten it. And I just think it's, so when one part's not working, it's very easy to blame that one part. And you go, well, okay, let's just, and something as big as your marriage and your relationship, it is the most destructive, devastating thing that could break down. So don't do it lightly. Try everything else. And in fairness to her, she pursued a new career. She got into yoga. She pursued different interests. And then she got to a point where she was like, I've done all that. I'm bettering myself. I feel more fulfilled. I feel independent, blah, 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 blah. But it's still not working. And then you can focus on that aspect.
Are we going to go back to the chat?
Yeah. It's just Rachel's kind of brought up a comment in relation to what you said. She says it's worth trying everything to save a marriage, so trying to recreate the spark or getting a new circle of friends or new activities. And she also said something quite interesting. She wondered whether Louise Redknapp made the right decision about her divorce, because she kind of got a new lease of life and went on TV and decided she'd been a stepford wife for too long and left her husband, and now she's kind of seems like she's regretting it a little bit.
I did.
Just interested.
Do you know, I asked my husband last night. I was like, have they got back together? Or
no, he's got a new girlfriend. He's got a
Oh,
younger
has he?
girlfriend.
Because I thought I've obviously picked up on something just on the grapevine, and I was thinking, oh, are they going to get back together? So they're not.
No.
Oh, that's a shame, because I like those two as a couple.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
like
but
him
you
too,
know,
to be fair,
the you never know what goes on
No, you
behind
don't.
closed doors. It all looks perfect
Absolutely.
on the outside, but you don't know what really goes on. I guess I think it's such a big decision, and it is life-changing for you, your partner, and everybody involved. So it's not a decision to be made lightly, and you have to put the time into it to really kick the tires and make that decision, because sometimes you come out of it exactly like her, and maybe now she's regretting it, but perhaps part of it is she was so unhappy that when she found that new lease of life, actually was another way of saying she just felt freedom and sort of liberated. But then there's still sadness, there's still grief, there's still a sense of loss, and also there's a sense of fear that, you know, is she going to find love like that again, or you're going to have, I wouldn't say regrets, but it's naive to think it's going to be plain sailing from there.
Yeah, well, my friend who's going through it now, 1 minute she's like, la la la, this is going to be the best thing ever. And then potentially, you know, the week later she's like really sad, or the next week she's angry. There's lots of emotions.
Yeah, and Carla says she got married quite young in her 20s, and now she feels like a completely different person in her 50s. You know, completely different. She's changed. She wouldn't have got married to that husband now in her 50s, so she's very happy to go through the divorce.
So we seem to be quite high in the divorce bit. divorce bit. I'm feeling bad.
Well,
I need to be a bit more. We need to be more pro-marriage.
No, but I think you sent me some statistics. You texted me, didn't you, about second marriages are more successful. And actually, so I think the younger you are, there's like a 30% chance of divorce, but
I think it was.
No, there's a 45 to 50% chance of divorce on your first, but with your second marriage, it's about 30. And actually, when you delved into that, those statistics said was it's more to do with age and where you are with that life stage. And I remember reading that the person you are at 20 is not the person you are at 30. The person you are at 30 is the person you are at 50. So yeah, you have different life stages, but when you're 30, you're sort of much more formed in your sense of identity and values and who you are. So if you're making a choice at 20 to get married, by the time you're 30, 35, 40, you're potentially completely different people, different needs and desires and life experience. So
if you're lucky, you'll grow together.
Yeah.
You will grow as people, you'll change as people, but that love you'll grow in the same direction because, obviously my grandparents met in their teens and lasted until their 90s. It's absolutely possible. Or you do that. You grow and you head in different directions.
Or one party, because I think, the pursuit of happiness, if that can ever be achieved, and you can't be happy all the time, but I think part of happiness is growing. Like that, you're growing, you're moving forward, you're not static, you're not stuck. And I sometimes wonder with women, because very much this role and purpose, let's just say, is the home. You get stuck in that role and you don't grow as an individual, which goes back to the Louise Hay, is if that box is not a grid of 9 different aspects that are about your happiness and fulfillment becomes one, when that goes, it's very, very
I always call
empty.
it foundations. So let's just say that box, your home box, I always call it foundations. They're my foundations. If my home box is secure and solid, I can take on the world.
Absolutely.
Whatever that is, that week, that day, that moment, I can take on the world. If that feels unsteady beneath my feet, I don't feel confident and able to do that. So I totally understand how, if all those, was it 9 boxes?
Yeah, it's a grid of 9.
Yeah, if 9 merge into one and that's not good, it's going to then affect.
Yeah, and also if that box isn't actually about you, it doesn't nurture you and you don't grow, it actually becomes, I don't know what the word is, that you're forgotten within it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
you're not going to grow as an individual, are you?
Because if your home is one of 9 boxes, but you're extremely fulfilled in your career box, or in your hobby box, or in your friendship box, or in your, I don't know, trekking Kilimanjaro again box, it's not going to, you're still going to feel quite fulfilled.
Yes.
You might look at your home box and go, right, that needs some work, it needs some attention, but you're still going to be happy.
Yes,
you're still going to be fulfilled.
And
it makes absolute sense. Yeah. We only have 5 minutes left. So
do we? We haven't even talked about. You wanted to talk. You wanted to start with dating.
I really wanted to get into dating. We're going to have to do a different one where we can get people's experiences of dating in later life, because that just fascinates me. Because I did have a message today on Instagram from someone who went, I'm 60. I've been by myself for 10 years. I can't see me getting into a relationship because I cannot stand dating. And I'm not sure anyone loves the whole dating process. I'm starting the conversation. I will shut back up so we can discuss it another time. There's highs and lows in the dating process. But for me, I'd be like, I'm going to have to go through this dating process because I want to find love again. Do you know what I mean? The end result would outweigh.
But if you think about it, how, you wake up and you're 50, you wake up when you're 55 or 45 or whatever, you've been in a marriage or relationship for 20, 25 years and suddenly dating. Well, dating today is not dating 25 years ago. Plus, it's changed, and I think it's scary. And we talk about this, you know, middle age isn't a dirty word. We're just as beautiful, we're just as valuable, we're just as attractive. But unfortunately, most of us feel invisible. We don't feel as confident. We don't feel as attractive. And then suddenly you're out there dating. It's scary.
Yeah.
It's really scary. And I think it, you know, and there's all these, you know, like dating apps, and then you've got ghosting.
Oh, you hear all these things now.
Yeah.
Serial daters.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway,
That's
we're going to have
big.
another.
We're going to have to have.
Let's do it another time. There is no age limit on love.
I was just about to say that.
Absolutely believe that, which is sort of where, the very first thing that we wanted to talk about. Is it ever too late to get married? Absolutely no.
And it's never too late to be in love.
Get married. If you want to live together, live together. If you want to live apart together, do that, whatever. But it's never too late to find love.
Yeah,
At any age.
Any age.
And because
Absolutely.
old love is like new love. The feelings of love are the same,
Those
and they never
butterflies
ever.
And the excitement is exactly
And
the
never
same.
lose, for me, never lose hope that you will find love and be in love. So, you know, when I'm 92, I'll be like in the nursing home.
Yeah, absolutely. You hear, no, but you do hear it all the time, people meeting in nursing homes.
yeah. And then just to end on a nice one, Julia says, you know, we've chatted a lot about divorce, but there is something very lovely about, you know, your grandparents who are married for 50 years or 60 years, and marriages that really do last a lifetime. There's something very special about that.
Can I say I love it? And it makes me really sad because I would have been married 22 years this year. So I've got friends who are approaching the 22 years mark. And it makes me very sad that I'm not at that. I'm celebrating 7 years. And so I have real fondness and love, affection, admiration to anyone who
it's
starts
wonderful
and sees it through. Whenever I'm listening to people celebrating their anniversary and their 50 years or whatever.
It's like my mum and
I'm
dad.
like,
I feel this. I think it is the most beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
I really, really do. Just 25 years, 50 years of building a life with someone that you love. It is, for me, perfect. It is the dream. And it is sad because, you know, I'm not remarried or... but I think it would be more sad to be in a relationship that doesn't, I don't know, be in a relationship that doesn't quite work and say goodbye to love for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years.
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, when people are in nursing homes on their deathbed and they always say, you know, what's your regret? And there was a piece in the Daily Telegraph that they interviewed a whole load of sort of 80, 85, 90-year-olds, and they said life, regret, all this sort of thing. And the number one thing that came out was a mediocre marriage.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought that was really, really interesting. Just one that bumbled along.
Yeah.
But didn't feed you, that didn't drive you, that didn't. And because I had that with my mum and dad, they were so passionate. That for me is like, that's what I want. So when you don't have that, you think, well, I deserve that.
Yeah.
Or deserve, So.
Well.
So never, ever too old to find love or
Definitely
to be in love.
Or to get married, or to live together apart.
Or get divorced if that's what you want to do.
Yes. All of the above. You do you. As we end up every single week.
There's no right or wrong.
Yes.
You do you, what's right for you. But you matter.
Yeah. Ignore what anybody else thinks. No, seriously. Because if we think too long about what someone's going to think about getting divorced or staying together or living apart, we'll never do it, will we?
Absolutely.
We'll be living somebody else's life. No. One life, and it's ours.
No dress rehearsal.
Absolutely.
So
There we
thank
go.
you everybody for watching again.
Yep.
Same time, same place, next week. Feel free on our social media if there's any topics you want us to cover.
Yeah.
I think you definitely want to do the dating one.
Well, I do now. I do. I want, but I really want some. I'm 10 years out of the dating game, so we need some real. We want some juicy dating stories, please.
See you next week.
See you soon. Bye.